Hello, I'm the Grub Street Lodger, and this is a little bit late because I've been waiting for some actual sunshine. Hello, sunshine. So, the month of March has not been my biggest reading month, and I'll explain why later, but I started it with Female Husbands by Jen Manion. Now, a female husband is somebody who's born a woman who lives as a man and takes a female wife. And this has happened a number of times, and this book is about this phenomenon and what this phenomenon says about people in general and about the societies in specific. And so one of the first sort of female husband stories was written by Henry Fielding, and it sort of sets the template. So it was about this man came into town, he seduced this woman, married her, and then she found out that it wasn't actually a man, it was a woman. And there are different variations of this. There's one that I found very interesting by a guy called Phelps. He was a man who died on the job and then was found to be a woman and to have been a centerpiece of his community, a real pillar, to have been married for 25 years. And if it hadn't been for this workplace accident, would never have been found out. And in fact, the coroner declared him a man on his death because he had a wife. And so was legally a man because he'd married as a man, which I found quite interesting. And there's a lot of, it's a very interesting book. There's a lot of stuff going about at the moment. There was that thing, I hadn't seen it, but it's called What is Woman? Well, this is What is Man? And of course you got the sex and the gender, and they're different. People are born, people are born intersex as well, but generally people are born one sex or another. But gender is a more complex construction of biology, society, and psychology. Oh, bit shiny there. And so, people keep asking, what is woman? What is woman in sport or woman in spaces? But this is what is a man. And part of being a man is being a husband. And then these people were husbands. So how much were they men? How much was their gender men? How much were they in society men? And what pitfalls and problems did they have? There's all sorts of interesting little bits. One thing that I found interesting was that the term female husband starts female, which is a biological sort of category, and husband, which is a sociological category. And then as it went on, the phrase sort of turned to women husbands, which is two social, gender versions. Because female is the biological term and woman is the sort of gendered, society word, which is why creeps always say female when they're talking about women, because they're just seeing sort of a body, a physical body, no sort of agency and no, that's why it's always creepy people that call women females. And I found that quite interesting. There was all sorts of just odd little bits in this that I found very, it sparked a lot of thoughts. One thing in particular is that the author, who goes as they and them, gender all the female husbands in the book as they and them. And they said they did this because it makes it easier. This person that they're talking about has lived, as a woman and as a man, and sometimes flipping back and forwards, or sometimes forced one way or the other. And so them is just tidier, is essentially it. But it's also peculiar because they, them is the sort of one way of thinking about it that none of the characters in this book, none of the real life people in this book will have known. None of them will have had the intellectual framework to call themselves they, them. So none of them are they, them, but all of them are in the book. And I find that's a little bit peculiar, but it's just, the way language ties itself in knots when it gets to this sort of subject. Anyway, I found it a very interesting book. It did exactly what I want a non-fiction to do. It told me a little bit more than I want to know, and it was very good. So then I moved on to Bernice Rubens' Our Father. I picked it because of that disgusting painting. It's a really ugly looking book, and I was like, oh, I wonder what this ugly book is, and I picked it up and I read the blurb, and it says it's about this woman called Veronica Smiles who goes to the desert and God starts talking to her. And I thought, I like these kind of metaphysical books where play fast and loose with metaphysical things. And so, yeah, that's exactly what happens. She meets God in the desert. She comes back. On the train on the way back, she meets a man, and she's 37, which is my age. And this man is the first man who's ever really attracted her, and part of it is almost a romance between them, and they end up getting married. And as this is all happening, she keeps bumping into God. And I love the tone in how mundane the book is. God is a really sort of disappointing figure. He's very, very needy. She describes him almost like a leech. He's always there. He always wants praise. Praise me. Say my name. Say my name. Say my name is great. Praise me. Sing to me. Love me. And it's kind of pathetic in his own way. At the same time, she's going through her past, through a drawer, and finding, this is the bit of the book I don't like, finding out her secrets, but they're not secrets because she knows them. So they're secrets to us, and it's a first-person book, so she keeps them a secret from herself, even though they're not. And this is what plunges the book into deep darkness. It's a backstory involving murder, jealousy, suicide, all sorts of nasty things. And as a result, the book then takes this left turn from this kind of whimsical story into something pretty nasty, but compellingly nasty. It says on the front, Beryl Bainbridge said, it will haunt you, and it is quite haunting how she takes this left turn as she unlocks this part of her past and who she is, and why God, who may just be a manifestation of her conscience, is haunting her. I won't go into any more detail than that because you might pick it up for yourself. And it's a very good book, but it does take this turn, and it probably helps to be prepared for it. Now, I got interested in an author called Naomi Mitchison because she looked interesting. So I bought a bunch of her books to see if she was interesting as I thought she might be. And I've read 2, and so far she's doing all right. So this is called Travel Light, and it's by Naomi Mitchison. It came out, when did it come out? A long time ago. She lived for 90 odd years, and she was writing that whole time. So this 1952, this one. And she was actually one of the sort of beta readers, I suppose you would want to say, of Tolkien. And this is her take on a fantastical story, much shorter, as you can see. And so we've got Halla, and she is the daughter of a queen, and a stepmother turns her out, but her nanny can turn into a bear and takes her and raises her for a bit with the bears. But because she's a human being, she's pesky and she won't hibernate. So she's then taken in by dragons and raised by dragons. And it's all very fairy story-ish. And there's some wonderful bits about what being raised by bears and dragons does to a person and their worldview. For example, a dragon's worldview is that money is to be hoarded. That human beings are weird, like heroes, evil people. They kill dragons, but also they're just strange because they take the treasure and they give it out. One of the sort of names of Beowulf is the bracelet giver. That's the hero. He gives away his wealth, his hoard. What's going on? But then the dragon dies, and she travels and she bumps into Odin, and Odin says to her, "Look, don't worry about all this hoard stuff. You're not a dragon. If you want to be protected by me, you need to travel light." And that's what she does with the ability to talk to animals. And she gets embroiled in this whole thing in Constantinople, where some characters from a country that doesn't exist, but is apparently a big feature in one of Mitchison's other books, have come to get a legal address in Constantinople. And she helps out and she moves on. And it's got a message to it, and the message is, travel light, move through life lightly, don't cling on to too much, be friends with everyone you can. It's got a really nice message, and it's told very nice, very succinct, very clear, but the slightness of the book and this sort of disconnect between the whole beginning with all the dragons and the more real life Constantinople bit, there's something a little bit lacking in it. It's a little bit flat. But still lots of good stuff in there, and I recommend it if you want to read some sort of early fantasy stuff, other directions it could have taken other than Lord of the Rings, which I personally don't really enjoy. So the next is her take on a sci-fi book. It's called Memoirs of a Spacewoman, and it's all about a woman called Mary, and she is a spacewoman. She's an explorer. In fact, she's a communicator, and so her job when she goes there is to watch the native creatures or whatever, and sometimes they're very much whatever, and to observe them and then try and communicate with them. And it's a bit like, have you seen the film Arrival? A bit like that. So as she learns to communicate with different creatures, it changes the way she thinks, and she changes as a result. And it's mostly sort of episodic, going to another planet, observing, watching, communicating, and as such, there's some interesting moral and sort of intellectual problems. It's a good book. My favourite was this planet where these sort of pleasure caterpillars, they love shitting in spirals. That's their sort of art. And they all have big wobbly orgies. But as they're doing that, these butterflies come and sort of project physically painful waves of blame and shame at them. And when you communicate with them, it turns out that if a caterpillar does too much of this shit spiraling, then they don't develop properly as a butterfly and they die when they come out the chrysalis. And if they're in the wibbly wobbly caterpillar orgy, then they'll have eggs in them. And when they become a butterfly, they lay the eggs and die. And they actually die shamed because they're laying eggs to create more caterpillars, even though they're the same species. And it's quite an interesting sort of allegory of generation difference, but it also makes an interesting point. The caterpillars' lives are made horrible by these butterflies. They just want to have fun and shag and shit spirals, but the butterflies keep stopping them. But from the butterfly's point of view, the caterpillar's sort of devil-may-care attitude to life is causing problems later on, and it's like, who do you settle with, and things like that. Anyway, it's a really interesting book, and how these creatures and things are imagined is really good. There's another animal where we come from mammals, and we're bipedal, and we think of things in sort of two terms. These come from a spiral shell-like creature, and they have 5 arms, and they think of everything in terms of sort of 5 options, and as a result don't often make up their mind and sometimes get killed. Anyway, it's a very good book. Since then, I've been reading Tristram Shandy. I'm not quite all the way through it yet, which is why I'm not talking about it yet. I've been really enjoying it. It's a reread for me. I can settle with it because I know what it's going to be and how nutty it's going to be and how it's not really going to go anywhere, but I can enjoy it not going anywhere. And in fact, I'm seeing a sort of a plot and a drive to it a lot more than I've ever seen when I've read it before. But reading that, and also my sort of yearly project of reading Clarissa, when you've read 10 pages of Clarissa, it can take an hour and I'm falling asleep, and then I don't have a lot of time to read Tristram Shandy, which is a completely different tone, but also quite you've got to engage with it, so I'm just not getting through as much, is the gist of it. Usually I'd get through 60 pages or so, and I'm getting through average 30 pages or so of Tristram Shandy after the horrible dragging 10 pages of Clarissa. So there you go. Another thing that's sort of holding up my reading is I've been to a lot of shows this month, and so time for the bonus time. Things I've seen. So the first thing I saw was at the Vault Festival. It's called Caligula and the Sea, and it was a 3-person play about how Caligula makes a deal with Neptune to become emperor, becomes corrupt, as we know Caligula did, and then declares war on Neptune, as Caligula did. And the best bit of it was puppets. So often Neptune was this sort of puppet of an eel, and the way the performer moved with it was brilliant. And also at one point a seagull, and that was a good puppet. The sort of letdown of it a bit was the guy playing Caligula. He was a little bit petulant and a bit pathetic, but the Caligula they were playing was kind of pathetic, so it did fit in, but it was you couldn't get on his side or against his side particularly. It just seemed a bit too pathetic. But he also built the puppets, so he's exonerated for everything there. The next thing I saw was Clementine, and that was a one-woman show telling the story of a woman who she had to get married by the age of 30, or something terrible would happen. But she had this bad luck that everybody she loved ended up dying in some horrible way. So what was she going to do? And it was all about her adventures, and they were all very silly. There were lots of sort of references to modern things, and there's a bit where she's getting little troll dolls out, and she says, "This is my dad, this is my brother, this is my sister, these are all my cousins," and she's like throwing all troll dolls everywhere. And it was good. The down bit for me on this was that when I saw it, 85% of the audience was friends with the writer performer, so it felt like an in group that I wasn't part of, and who were enjoying it. I enjoyed it, but they were enjoying it way too much almost. It was like, it's not that funny just because it's your friend. So yeah, it was good-ish. But yeah, the next thing I saw was called The Blue Pool of Questions, and that was in this most fantastic venue, the Puppet Barge. So it's literally a riverboat. You go inside, and it's got all these like marionettes hanging everywhere, and then the body of the boat is a purpose-built puppet theatre. So it's rake seating in this little thing when the puppets come through. Usually it's marionettes, but this was called side-along or table puppets. So people in black behind with sticks, and then the puppets are here, but you can't see the people behind moving it because they're wearing black. And The Blue Pool of Questions is a book about somebody who comes to a town that's very sort of dull and asks lots of questions, and they form this pool that floods everywhere. And it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. It was bits of it were in Arabic as well, and it was all done to an oud, and it was very magical and great. My audience there, though, consisted of about 70% people under the age of 3. And there were walkouts because it wasn't quite the toddler experience. But if you're older than the toddler, yeah, I recommend it. It was really good. The next thing I saw was called How to Be a Pirate. And this was a lot like Clementine, really. It was a one-person show about a silly quest, this time being a pirate and finding a treasure, with lots of silly things happening, like he had to crawl through a tunnel pretending he was going through a Cyclops' arsehole, and just daft things. He showed us a narrative arc, which was a little fluffy Noah's Ark, and he threw that away, and that was basically it. Also, according to his own admission at the end, a lot of things went wrong, and it was a bit of chaos. It was joyful chaos. I liked it more than Clementine, I think, because I like pirates more, but I think they're pretty averaged out to each other. I think they're pretty equal, to be honest. The next thing I saw, I didn't have to review. It was the Great British Bake Off musical, which I saw with my sister. I've never seen even a clip of the Great British Bake Off, let alone an episode. But I gathered what were the in-jokes and what were the bits, and it was a very well made musical. Like the cast was sort of, they weren't unknowns. There were people we've seen in other things and all this kind of stuff. The songs were a lot stronger than some musicals I've seen. Yeah, and all the staging and all that was pretty decent. And the story was meh, but yeah, a lot of musicals, the story is meh. It was throughout a series of a Great British Bake Off, and 2 of them are falling in love, and we learn all their backstories. And one of them, the backstory was not being able to have children, and this was addressed with a slightly icky song of Bun in the Oven. And yeah, the cake puns, I get it, but don't bring them into the childless storyline. But yeah, it was good. And in fact, my main thought was, wow, they put way more effort into that than they needed to, considering Bake Off's not going to be a thing in 10 years, and they're going to be able to restage it again. But there you go. Then the next thing I saw with my sister was Newsies, and that was at Wembley, and that was all around you. They're flying over your head. They were doing this. There's lots of jumping and splits and climbing and all of this, and the songs are very, very catchy, and the story is about a bunch of newspaper boys doing a strike, and it was very, very good. It was the athleticism of it was really impressive. How they just keep on doing it, swinging from the lampshades and leaping and singing these vigorous songs at the same time. It was very, very good. I liked it. Next thing was called The Black Cat. That was the best thing I've seen this month. It was also the simplest thing I've seen this month. It was somebody, essentially, The Black Cat is Edgar Allan Poe story narrated in the first person. He was doing it. He was, telling us it and sort of acting it out. And at the same time, there was this woman who sort of was almost on. It's like he felt her rather than saw her, and she was playing music that matched the story. And as I say, very very simple. It was at the King's Head Theatre Pub, and it was best thing I've seen this month. The next thing I saw was called Creature, which is a ballet. It was at Sadler's Wells. It's supposed to be inspired by Frankenstein and Wojciech, but it was way more Wojciech than Frankenstein. This person, who may have not been a person, was called Creature, and he was being experimented on, and the results of that were going to help these colonizers go into space. And the colonizers were introduced by a ballet version of the Goose Step, and everything was creepy and weird, and most of the songs consisted of bleeps and bloops and blaps and static and things, and it was all very odd. I said in my review that ballet is intrinsically absurd and dystopias are intrinsically absurd, and so a dystopian ballet makes sense. So there you go, that was that. And the last thing I saw was Character Building Workshop, which was the worst thing I saw, unfortunately. It was a improvisational comedy that takes its basis in Dungeons and Dragons. So Ellen, was she called Ellen? Someone Ellen, I think was. That's my notebook that I take to the thing. So Sasha Ellen, she was the games master, and she'd done a really good job. She'd created this world, she created these characters. She put a load of effort in, but then her panel didn't play along, so they didn't go on the Dungeons and Dragons quest, and they didn't use the opportunities to make humour. They just sort of sat there and tried to make jokes and didn't. If one of them was trying to sabotage it as it was going along, that might work. But if all three of them are just not that into it, it didn't work. So there you go. But it is an improvisational thing. So the next one you see might be the best thing ever. You never know. So yeah, that was what I've read. Not so much. What I've seen, quite a lot this month. Thank you very much.